Boy, that was pretty good. Very, very well done. I know it's such a simple piece, wasn't it, ladies? No, very well done. Thank you very much. It's good to be with you, brethren, again on this beautiful Southern California day. As Mr. Fish was commenting, if I bored you with this story, please let me do it again. Growing up in Southern California, our family did not go to the parade. We often went to the game, but my dad would say a true Californian, he was from Iowa, a true Californian would pray for snow on January 1st in the Rose Bowl. Do you know why? All those people in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Minnesota, and Wisconsin would say, hey, Edith, look at that. We've got 8 feet of snow here, and they got nothing. Let's move to California. So true Californians prayed for snow. But that didn't stop any of you. Well, again, I had a choice between continuing with the book of Acts and something else, and I said, let's go back to Acts, because this is a really interesting chapter, the second half of chapter 17. And it is because many of us have been this location. It is so well documented what we're about to read in Acts chapter 17. We last saw Paul in Acts, in the first part of chapter 17, waiting in Athens for his compatriots. Let's recap the last portion and pick it up in verse 13, chapter 17 of Acts. But when the Jews from Thessalonica learned that the word of God was preached by Paul at Berea, they came there also and stirred up the crowds. Stirred up the crowds is Greek for, that's not good. They stirred up the crowds. Then immediately the brethren sent Paul away to go to the sea, to get him out of there. But both Silas and Timothy remained there. So those who conducted Paul brought him to Athens, and receiving a command from Silas and Timothy to come to him with all speed, they departed. So he flees Thessalonica and he goes to Athens. There's some success, but the Thessalonians, it kind of went south, so he winds up in Athens, Greece. In verse 16 it says, now when Paul waited for them at Athens, his spirit was provoked within him when he saw that the city was given over to idols. His spirit was stirred inside him. It says he saw idols. The verse 16 word there, full of idols, and if I mispronounce any of the Greek, we have Mr. Athivalos who will correct my Greek, so you can go to him if anything's incorrect. Full of idols is a haxlekomen, which means it is nowhere else found in the New Testament. It means intensely idolatrous. Let me try it. Don't get after me, Ollie. Okay, he says, okay, I've got sanction. He did this, so I think that's okay. Katiadolos. Close enough? Oh, I got a thumbs up. It means intensely idolatrous. How many of you have been to Athens? Wow. I'm not talking about the Apollo food vendor that's local here to Southern California, and I'm not talking about the Greek Grill in Hackensack, New Jersey. How many have been to the Greek Grill in Hackensack, New Jersey? Oh, a few of you have. Good. So quite a few of you have been to Athens. Becky and I have on a vacation kind of business trip, and we thought it was incredible. I'd go back in a heartbeat. But this isn't the reason why. But it is full of idols. They're everywhere. They're in every nook and cranny. I'm going to give you kind of a long quote, but it's germane to this message. And again, I apologize, a little long, but just sit back and listen to this analysis by Greg Davies in his St. Paul in Greece, where he states, quote, we learn from Pliny, this is a Roman historian, we learn from Pliny that at the time of Nero, Paul's time, Athens contained over 3,000 public statues, just in Athens. 3,000 public statues, besides a countless number of lesser images within the walls of private houses. In one street there stood before every house a square pillar carrying upon it a bust of the god Hermes. Another street, named the Street of the Tripods, had more. Every gateway and porch carried its protecting god. Every street, every square, nay, every purlieu, and every walkabout, it means nook and cranny, everywhere had its sanctuaries. And a Roman poet bitterly remarked, very famous quote, it was easier in Athens to find the gods than to find man. It's true, the idols and the statues aren't they are everywhere. In motels, hotels, on dashboards of cars, the shops, you can buy them by the dozen. We did. We got 2 for, never mind, I'm kidding. I'm joking. Just joking. We did smash some plates. How many of you smashed plates in Greece? How many of you know that? A few of you did, yeah. It's a long story. Ask Sharon, she's been there. But ground zero in all of Athens is where? Even if you haven't been to Athens, you know where it is. It's the Acropolis. Acropolis, high on a hill, the city. The Acropolis was where the Parthenon Temple is located, and there's more idols within the friezes, just in that. There's the Erechtheion, possibly from the founder of Athens, Erechtheus. Then there's the female idols along the replicas now. There's idols everywhere on the hill. Just below that surrounding area is the Areopagus, which means Mars Hill. Many of you have heard of Areopagus. It's a large outcropping. It's not really a level area, but it's halfway down to the ground from the Parthenon. It is the Mecca of debate. Now it is the Mecca of tourists. But at the time of Paul, it was the center of debate. Below that, on the ground level, was the Agora, later the Roman Stoa, or porch below. And that was where everyday hobnobbing and market shopping was conducted. It is an amazing, amazing area. It's huge, and it sits as an archaeological site, all of it, to this very day. And you can Google it very easily and see the different pictures. By Paul's time, most of the structures, the major structures on the Acropolis and the surrounding area, these structures were 400 to 500 years old. That makes them now 2,400 to 2,500 years old that we see today, and they're in pretty good shape. And of course, once again, for the umpteenth time, there are idols everywhere. And so, as we maneuver through our own Babylon, or Rome, or even what we may call our own Athens, what can we learn from Acts chapter 17 as we go through this? As a title, really catchy. Acts 17, part 2, Idols, Idols Everywhere. Or as a subtitle, The Seed Picker versus the Philosophers. And I'll explain what that means. So let's pick it up in verse 17, Acts chapter 17. Therefore, Paul reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the Gentile worshipers. The word Gentile there is added. It just means generally the God-fearers or the worshipers. So he directly goes to a synagogue. Of all things that Athens would have, it has a synagogue. And that's where Paul goes, obviously on the Sabbath. And so he's there that happened to be there at the marketplace daily. He's there at the marketplace. He's there at the synagogue. He's there fairly alone. But this has not stopped him from engaging with the people around him. Then certain Epicureans and Stoic philosophers encountered him, and some said, "What does this babbler want to say?" Can you not just picture the Epicureans and the Stoics, the beard strokers? I put that in my notes, and one of the commentaries I referenced later said they were bearded, and they stroked their beards as they... Can you just picture this? What will this babbler, the seed picker as it is in the original, what will he have to say? It says that he reasoned with them. Again, this is a very, very important Greek word. It means dialectic. Have you ever heard of Hegelian dialectic? It is the ability to go back and forth in discussion of giving and receiving information and seeking common knowledge and understanding truth. So he engages them in what they are very familiar with, this back and forth reasoning. And Paul is probably very much at home in this back and forth. The marketplace that we talked about before is literally the Agora. So in Athens, Greece, near the Acropolis, the Agora is where Paul was. The marketplace is literally the word Agora. Now, Epicureans and Stoics. Epicureans and Stoics. We have them today. They just go by different names. Don't they? I see people nodding their heads. Yes, they go by different names. We won't go there. But Epicureans, they were the followers of Epicurus. Epicurean delights, they sought pleasure and not much else. Pleasure and happiness, maybe some tranquility. That was the Epicurean objective, to be happy, be tranquil. The Stoics, they were stoic. They were the followers of Zeno, of wisdom of the divine will, whatever that means. The Stoics comes from the word stoa, which literally means porch. And Zeno would speak from his porch, his area, kind of like his own little home pulpit. And Zeno would speak words of wisdom. Josephus, the historian, likened them, the Stoics, to the Pharisees. They were nobler and more erudite. You'll notice, and you'll remember from your reading of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Remember, those names are familiar to you? Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Do you know how you can remember their names in chronological order? SPA. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. These two were philosophers from different Greek schools. So Paul is at ground zero for debate and discussion. And he does both in the synagogue and he does in the marketplace. The word babbler is really interesting. Again, it appears nowhere else in the New Testament but here. And it means seed picker and has to do with a bird. F.F. Bruce in his commentary says, quote, about this word seed picker, one who picks up scraps of learning here and there and pervade them wherever he could, dropping them indiscriminately. Sound familiar? Seed picker. One who picks up scraps of learning, a little here, a little there, and then drops them indiscriminately wherever they are. That's what they call Paul. But you'll notice that he says, others said, he seems to be a proclaimer of foreign or strange gods. This is verse 18. Strange or foreign gods, because he preached to them this Jesus and the resurrection. This was a name apparently they had never, ever heard. So when Paul goes to the Agora, and he's in Athens, he is preaching Jesus Christ, possibly for the first time ever, it's been said. He also brings up the concept, which is interesting, resurrection. Named Jesus, this one named Jesus who has been resurrected. Did the Greeks believe in resurrection? Not really. Not really. It's a loaded hot button term because the Greeks felt that the human form was the most ideal. It was the near perfect. Nothing could be assumed greater. But we still see in these verses, this one simple verse, because he preached to them Jesus and the resurrection, we see this formula that Paul uses over and over, along with the other apostles, over and over and over again. This formula of Jesus Christ, his death, burial, and the resurrection, over and over and over again. Verse 19, and they took him and brought him to the Areopagus, saying, may we know what this new doctrine is. I'm sorry, brother, I've got this picture in my mind of maybe too many movies, too much reading, and having been there, they're just sitting there, their robes. May we know what this new doctrine is of which you speak. For you are bringing some strange things to our ears. Therefore we want to know what these things mean. And then Luke adds the postscript, verse 21, for all the Athenians and the foreigners who were there spent their time in nothing else, but either to tell or to hear some new thing. Who's the seed picker? Who's the babbler? They wanted to hear more, and that's a good thing. And they take him to Areopagus, Mars Hill, as it is in a Latinized English version. It's a high place, literally. It's not quite up to the Acropolis. It's midway to the ground. And this was the central for debate and discussion and new ideas. And Paul had some new ideas, as we can tell from the text. So we are hearing strange things. We wish to know more. We want to learn more. So it's official. We take you to Areopagus, the place to discuss. It was a place of debate, and often the historians tell us it was a place of judicial courts. Now, we don't think that Paul was being taken there for judicial reasons, but nonetheless, they were there to evaluate him. What's really interesting is the word Areopagus, or a version of it, is the name of today's Greek Supreme Court. In fact, I invite you to go to the Greek Supreme Court. Just Google Greek Supreme Court and look at their website. You'll see this section of Acts that we're about to read copied onto the national website. That's how important it was, on Mars Hill. So what follows is Paul's singular speech. Many have called it or termed it his Magnum Opus, his tour de force. In fact, for those of you how many of you have been to Areopagus, about Mars Hill? A few of you have been there. As you will know, his speech that we're about to read is there emblazoned on a plaque. I think it's a bronze plaque, completely in Greek, the words that we're about to read. This is Paul's big speech by many of the commentators. Nothing was like it before or since. It is the most reported, the most analyzed, the most debated, the most commented on of all of Paul's speeches, and as we'll see, for good reason. So we're going to take some time, and we're going to pick it up in verse 22. So just remember the setting. He's surrounded by philosophers, the Epicureans, the Stoics, probably a hodgepodge of others that are there, right? He's there at Areopagus, Mars Hill. And just think, when he's speaking, those of you who have been there, what is behind Paul, up and behind him? The Parthenon as a backdrop. What's below him? The Stoa, the marketplace. So the view, the area is fascinating. His setting, I just let this sink in as Paul ascends to speak. Verse 22, then Paul stood in the midst of the Areopagus and said, Men of Athens, I perceive that in all things you are very religious. He's probably looking around, right? The statues, the temple, he may be pointing to the temple, the Parthenon, the Erechtheion. He could be pointing down to the Agora. You're very religious. For as I was passing through and considering the object of your worship, in other words, the statues and the idols and the temples, I even found an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God. Therefore, the one whom you worship, without knowing him, I proclaim to you. What is interesting about these verses is he looks at the temples, the idols, again with the Parthenon behind him. These are religious people. They are surrounded by religious things. They think religious thoughts. They want to know down deep inside, one would think. But the setting is so important. The word unknown God is interesting. It's technically better translated by the commentators as to an unknown God. There's no article adjective here. It is agnosto theo. Agnosto. What does agnosto mean? Agnostic is where we get the word agnostic. It means no knowledge. They don't know. They don't know who this God is. Theo means God. Agnosto theo. No knowledge. In other words, in English, they ain't got a clue who this is. So we just name him no name. Paul says, I will declare who this one is to you. Therefore, the one to whom you worship without knowing him, I will proclaim to you, God, Theos, who made the world and everything in it, since he is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands. Nor is he worshipped with men's hands as though he needed anything, since he gives to all life and breath and all things. And he has made from this one blood every nation of man to dwell on the face of the earth, and has determined there are pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings, so that they should seek the Lord in the hope that they might grope for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as also some of your own poets have said. For we are also his offspring. Therefore, since we are the offspring of God, we ought not to think that the divine nature is like gold or silver or stone, something shaped by art and man's devising. Truly, these times of ignorance God overlooked, but now commends all men everywhere to repent, because he has appointed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by the man whom he has ordained. He has given assurance of this to all by raising him from the dead. Paul begins very interesting. This is unlike any other speech he has ever given. He starts off, after telling them they don't know who this God is, he's going to proclaim this God to them. And again, he uses the word theos. Keep in mind, he's speaking Greek to Greeks. They know exactly what he is saying, every word. He says that this God does not dwell in these temples. God doesn't dwell in them, or in the forms made by man. These statues, these idols, God's not in them. He's not made out of gold or silver or stonework. And again, I just have to believe that Paul, like I just did, it's natural. He's gesturing around. And this is kind of a sharp, I'm a little bit of a pointed jab at them. These things you've created, they represent God. God's not in those. God doesn't need anything. God is the giver of all things. He is the creator of all things. And he says, God, he wants man to find him. He says, God is not far away. He just isn't. You don't need to go to the temple to find God now. You don't need to seek out a graven image. He says, in him we move and have our being. In these two sections, verse 28 or so, They feel that Paul is quoting two of the Greek philosophers. One is Aratus, the second is Epimenides. Both are Greek poets. And if you look at the commentaries, you'll see almost a direct quote from these verses in chapter 17 in verse 28 and 29. So Paul has done his homework. This must have shocked them. He quotes Greek poets. He agrees with them, these couple of lines. What's interesting, when he delicately references the idols in verse 29, these graven images, what does he never mention? He never discusses, never brings up anything relative to Israel, the law, the commandments. No reference. Why? Because they have no reference to it. They have no, if he said Moses, they would know they did not know who Jesus was. They may know who Israel is, but they have no basic reference. And this is so fascinating. But what he does do is he brings up repentance, which they would understand, a judgment day, which they all believed in, and he talked about this man, that God has resurrected. Subtle terms, ones they would understand, seemingly very basic to us, but directly applicable to his audience, that they could relate, that they would understand, and hopefully at some level agree. It is a fascinating speech. This speech is a perfect approach considering to where he was and who he was speaking to and who they were and the fact that he was alone. It's perfect. Chuck Swindoll, in his commentary on this section, speaks of four aspects of this message by Paul. Number one, Paul started where they were. He started his message where the receivers of what he was saying, where they were. He also used the familiar to introduce the unfamiliar. He used terms and ideas that they would understand, familiar ideas, to introduce not so familiar ideas. Number three, he developed his theme forcefully and clearly. Yes, he did. He's pretty pointed, and you can see as you read it, his audience, when he talks about idols, I'm sure he's getting a little pointed with them about all these idols. You don't need these. These temples, you don't need these. God is here. And number four, he kept their attention with relevant illustrations. I would tend to agree with Dr. Swindoll, but I would reword it. I would say that Paul observed his surroundings. He was acutely aware of where he was. He was taken by it. It says in this first section, verse 16, that his spirit was aroused inside him when he said, look at all this. He'd never seen this before. If you've been to Rome and versus Athens, Rome is full of statues as well, but they are Christianized more. There's lots of pagan idols in Rome and pagan temples in Rome. But there's a Christianized element to it. Not so with Greece. Not so with Athens. It was totally, utterly Greek. So Paul observed his surroundings. All the idols, they were very religious. We would call them idolaters. We could think of one of the commandments against that. He was also aware that these people loved shiny things. They loved new things. Is it new? I like it. What is it? Doesn't matter. It's new. I want to talk about it. I want to discuss it. That's all they did, it seemed, all day long. Anything different. And they were, in many ways, just plain searching. Number three, he was familiar with their literature and beliefs. As we said, he did his homework. Paul did his homework. He took poets, Greek poets of the day, and he quotes them. In the midst of his speech, he quotes them. This had to have impressed them. That means he understood something about Greek theology or Greek worship. It was very, very important. He did his homework. He spoke to them in terms they would understand. Paul was a clever boy. He used terms they would comprehend. Again, Paul never mentions the Bible or verses. He never mentions Israel or Judea. He never mentions in this section, technically, in this section, Jesus by name. He had prior, but he did not name Jesus in this section. But he does refer to the resurrection as part of his formula. This concept of resurrection was known to the Greeks. It was an idea, a concept, but it was rejected in the main. They again believed that the human form was perfection. If you've been to the Getty Museum, I hate to keep bringing up different places where you can see idols, you can see the Greek sculptures. You can see the Greek sculptures in the ideal form of the human form. It was to them nothing higher. Even the gods look like men rather than the other way around. But he uses key words. He uses a term they would understand, theos, God in the Greek, and his creation. That God is the creator of everything they see. He needs nothing. So they would understand those terms. They would understand repentance. They would understand bad doing. They tried to avoid bad doing, wrong thoughts, wrong actions. He also brought up the concept of man's dependence through idols, made of metal with their mere hands. They have nothing intrinsic to them that they would worship these. Why would you worship something that you yourself made? You made the God. You made the temple. God's not the temple, and God's not the statue. But he uses these terms that they would understand. And then he uses a very interesting term, God's resurrected man. I think he did that as a literary device to say, who is this resurrected man? They would want to know more. What was the result? Let's turn to verse 32. And when they had heard of the resurrection, that key word, the resurrection of the dead, some mocked. That's understandable. While others said, we will hear you again. They are intrigued. We will hear you again on this matter. So Paul departed from them, among them. However, some men joined him and believed. Among them Dionysius the Areopagite, a woman named Damaris, and others with them. Dionysius the Areopagite, they think that when he's named an Areopagite, he was one of the leaders of the Areopagite, it's easy to say, the Areopagite Council. He was an important man. This is common to the book of Acts, where Paul, after his speech, certain key leaders, both men and women, believe. They become believers, and they follow him. And a woman named Damaris. I'm sure these people were very well known at the time that Paul was there. But some mocked. Some mocked. And that's also part of Paul's issue, is not everybody's going to like what you say. We know no more about Athens after this. It's never really brought up. Paul moves on after this chapter to California. He moves to 1 Corinthians. You laugh at that. We're going to show you how the book of Corinth, it's applicable especially to Californians. Someone has termed the books of 1st and 2nd Corinthians of 1st and 2nd Californians. You think not? So we know no more of Athens. We do know later that there was a church formed, but that it's not contained in the book of Acts. But that's all we read of them. Athens will remain, though, a singular standard in terms of messages for Paul the Apostle. In fact, Wikipedia is not one of my sources, but in the searching, doing research, it has a whole site on the sermon at Areopagus. And as I said, the Greek Supreme Court has it listed on their website. What can we learn? What can we learn from Acts chapter 17, the second part? The parallels, if they haven't grabbed you already, of Paul's world and our world are very, very similar. Are we not also surrounded by idols? They just look a little different. They're harder to see. Sometimes they're not hard to see at all. They're right in front of us. But often the enemy uses cloaking devices, kind of like Star Trek. He uses cloaking devices to confuse us, to ensnare us. But some are hiding right in front of us in plain sight. They distract and they replace of who and why we are to believe, and who and what is real and what is true. Idols mask the truth. They are not the truth. We often speak of engaging with other people, and all of us, to one degree or another, one level or another, every week we encounter people possibly to talk about what we think, what we believe. Especially after the holidays that we just experienced, there was probably, I heard from people, there was quite a bit of engagement. If we do so, one of the guidelines possibly should be Paul's message here at Areopagus. The Areopagus message has got much thought to ponder. It's a function, it can easily as an exemplar. How it was handled, the way it was handled. The Areopagus message, number one, know your surroundings. Always know that. Where are you when you're about to engage with someone? What is the environment, the setting? It's important to ignore that. If Paul had ignored that, that would have been fatal. Know your surroundings. What, in many ways, is your marketplace? Each and every one of us, most of us don't live together. We're in many, many different households, different cities, different areas. I don't live in Pasadena anymore. I live 40 miles away. My marketplace is different than your marketplace. My agora is different than your agora, but they have similarities. Number 2, know your audience and what they believe. If you engage with someone and talk to them about what you believe, you better understand what they believe. How are you going to find out what they believe? You ask them. Ask them. People are usually very open to telling you what they think about it. The environment is right, the setting is right. What is it that you believe? You'll be better able to handle the conversation once you know what they believe. Ask them, and God will prepare you, I believe. Just think of the people that are in this room and listening on Zoom. The people that will hear this, your backgrounds are all different. I'm always amazed by that. We surely don't wear the same clothes, the same shoes. We don't live in the same house. We don't live in the same city. We all come from different areas. Some of us are native Pasadenans, others are not. We're all from different locations. We all come with different backgrounds. And God can use each and every one of those backgrounds. Number 3, communicate with people, I believe, in simple terms they will understand. You already understand it. You're speaking about it. Communicate in simple terms they will understand using the formula and focus, focus, focus. Do not, I say this again advisedly, I've said it before, I'll say it again, no fear of repercussion. Do not hand them a booklet. You're the booklet. You know what's in the booklet. You are a walking booklet. Explain to them what it says. You don't need to know Greek and you don't need to know Hebrew. These things are very basic and very elementary. You need simply a willingness to communicate and engage, and you need God's Spirit. The objective, as Paul tells us very easily in Acts chapter 17 and elsewhere throughout Acts, the objective is to explain, to give simple answers to questions that have been asked. Find out what those questions are. Get to know this person, especially those that are close to you that may not understand what you understand. Stick to the facts. Stick to the truth. We're not here to convert the world. That's God's job, isn't it? If it were up to us, so far the results are not encouraging. If it were up to us, it's up to God. Recognize, lastly, this is going to be the hardest one, and I hate to be nosy. Recognize in your life your idols and those that should not be there. It's very easy to look at other idols and say, I'm sure glad I'm not like them. Someone like the prayer of the sinner and the Pharisee. Recognize in your life idols that don't belong near you or with you. Habits, patterns of behavior that you know that God dislikes. All of us have them. I have them. You have them. Find out what those are. It doesn't have to be a graven image. It doesn't have to be a physical object. But it can be close. It can be close. Maybe it is. And maybe your hands with your mind have carved it, have shaped it, have molded it, and you've built it into an idol. You have fashioned it. As we navigate through our own Atheno, Romano, Babylonio, I just made that up on the fly. Atheno, Romano, Babylonio world. Look outwardly and be careful of idols that are outwardly seen and those that are inwardly seen. Keep God and His Son close to you, central. Remember, a part of our calling. We heard that in the very first message. But start with the idols within. That's easier. Start with those before picking the idols without.